Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we're bringing you the next installment in our HIVE CMS user learning series. In today's discussion, we're going to take a deep look at user options, what they mean, and how those user options affect you in your daily use of HIVE. So what are we actually going to go over? I mean, options are nice. We like options, and we always like to change things and customize it to what we need and how we like to use it, and that's great. And we are talking specifically here about HIVE, and so you're in HIVE and using it regularly. But to what extent can you really control exactly what it is you see as a HIVE end user? Maybe not an admin. You're a user of HIVE, and you want to kind of see how this controls, how these controls can kind of affect your daily use. Well, HIVE has a few different options. They're in your control. You can change them. You can modify it to really improve exactly how you interact with HIVE depending on what you need to get out of it. And so I'm going to show you each of these major options, how you can control the settings, and really what they're used for, what they mean, what the impact is, so you can kind of customize this for your needs. We're going to take a look at some very specific things. Controlling preview sizes, identifying what they are, how they affect kind of what the changes are, modifying that so you can leverage this for your needs. And in a lot of cases, I actually use preview sizing dynamically throughout the day. I'll increase and decrease them, and I want to show you exactly where you can do that. We want to show you exactly how that content is presented, controlling that. So in some cases, you might want to see it just as tiles. In some cases, you might want to see a list of objects. In other cases, you might want to see some more detail about these. And so you can change how that's presented to you, if it's just an icon or if it's something else. We also want to make sure you know exactly how to control type selection. When you double-click on a piece of content, this is especially specific to Revit content. As you double-click that content, it might have options for you, and you can choose whether you see the options or whether you don't, and when you interact with it, kind of a little bit about what it does. And then also, there's other ways of seeing data. Some of how this content is presented in that second bullet, you might want to change this a bit so you can control sort of the filter pane and the detail pane, which is a bit about presentation of content data and the persistence of those. And so we'll take a look at that here throughout this discussion. So with that, let's jump in live and take a look at what this looks like in the Revit environment. So we're first going to take a look at preview sizing. So I'm here in the HIVE CMS. I'm signed in as an end user Joe. So I don't have any admin controls in this session today. We're talking just about what I as an end user can work with. Now, to actually see some kind of content and look at preview sizes, we have to search for something. And so what I'm going to do is just run a pre-saved search here. It doesn't matter what I run the search on, just showing something here. There's a couple of different ones that I have sort of at my fingertips. Maybe I want to take a look at doors. In fact, I'll probably use this for most of today's example. In my doors, I'm seeing some previews. Now, every once in a while, when my BIM admin uploads a piece of content, processes something new in, I might not get a reasonable preview, so it might just show up as a cube. We're going to ignore that, and we're going to focus on the ones that actually do have some kind of a preview. You can see these are all fairly consistent in their orientation, in their graphics. They're all pretty good. But if we're talking about preview image sizing, sometimes when the content is a bit more generic, I can maybe make these previews a bit smaller so I can get more results on the same page. Now, if we go back to the previous example where I was taking a look at, say, those details, those smaller previews don't really help me see much. And so I was mentioning I kind of adjust these previews throughout the day. I sometimes want these a bit bigger so I can see a little bit more about what's in those previews. I can make them up to 50 pixels in size, and while I can't directly read the text, I can see pretty good, exactly what's going on in these typical details and know whether it's what I'm searching for to drop into my project or not. Generally speaking, my personal preference is to get these tile sizes balanced so that the icons are as big as they can be without increasing the height too much. So I like them being full width, just about like this. So my slider's kind of just at about the 1/3 mark, give or take, on this slide bar. This way, when I run a search for things like regular content, I can see them pretty reasonably. When I'm seeing things like doors, I can see, oh, that was doors already. When I see things like typical details, I can see that pretty easily. And if I need to increase or decrease it, that's fine. But this is fully in my control. And Hive will remember whatever I set my preview size to so that I can recall this the next time I open this up. So that's one way of kind of controlling what I'm seeing out here. Now, these preview sizes might change depending on how I'm viewing the presentation of this content. And that's really the next major one here, content presentation. Let me make Hive just a touch smaller here so we can see the full word, content presentation. So there's 3 different ways of presenting content to yourself. The default here is the tile view. Just to the right of the slider right there is the tile view. And that's what, again, Hive starts out as for most people, and where I find most people tend to like to use this. But maybe you want to see this content presented a slightly different way. Maybe you like the list view presentation, where it gives you a little bit more data. This is another very popular way. And when I'm looking at content this way, I may actually change my preview sizes to be a little bit bigger here. Again, or maybe just so that the height of these areas and the width of those tiles are kind of appropriate, so it's not making it too tall. So right there is kind of my balance. It's just a little bit smaller than it was in the previous view. Some people might like this a little bit bigger. That's totally fine. It's up to you. Obviously, you can adjust these to whatever you feel is meaningful. I personally like to maximize how many pieces of content I get on a page, and so I will leave this right here. And again, if I'm talking more about, say, component families, that's just fine, that particular size. That's a good size, in my opinion, to kind of view this content. But I get to see a little bit more about the content here, more than just the name. See, in tile view, I see just the name. But in this view, I see the name, I see the rating, the sort of the user-defined rating, if ratings are important to you. I can see what libraries it's associated to, if there's any tags, basically information about reviews, loads, downloads. I can see the category of the object and what Revit versions this might be related to. So I get a bit more information, and for some, that's very nice. I can see that right away without needing to go any deeper. I can get quite a bit of data about this object and know if this is what I'm looking for. And that's really the point of Hive, right? To be able to find something, know it's the object that you want, and then use it in your model when you're ready to. The final way of kind of presenting this content to myself is to change from this list view to a table view. And again, this might affect how I choose to present my tile sizes here. In a table view, I would personally use Hive a bit wider here on screen, and I would probably take these values and make them quite a bit wider so I can see all of the data that's kind of embedded inside of here. So I'd make these columns quite a bit wider here. In this case, like the name of the content, I'd make that wider. I squished mine all down because I usually have my Hive really, really small here. But again, here, when I see this in sort of this list view or this table view, I'd probably make my tiles as small as I could because, again, I'm trying to maximize what I get on screen. But that's my choice, right? You might have a different choice there. I personally don't really use this view myself very much. This is kind of more of a manager style view. So I kind of find that end users will typically use things like the tile view with slightly larger previews to see what's going on, or perhaps the list view, with good balanced tile sizes, and then they can squish the Hive down a bit so they have a bit more screen real estate to play with. All right. So those are 3 different ways of viewing your content: tile, list, and table view. That's how you can present it to yourself, and then in collaboration with that, you've got this sort of preview image size that you can dabble with at the same time. All right, let's talk about another major aspect of what I'm going to insert into my model, and that is the type selection. So I'm going to go back to my sort of preferred size here of the Hive window, and I'm also going to have Hive pinned to the foreground. By the way, I didn't mention this, but this is certainly an option that you have with the Hive CMS. You can choose whether it's pinned to the foreground on top of everything else or not. And so right now it's not pinned, and if I click the pin, it shows me what will happen when I click that, it'll unpin it from the top of the window when I choose the button here. But this is nice because this way, if I happen to be on fewer monitors, or I need to be on a single monitor even, when I grab things like the Revit environment, I can keep Hive forcibly on top of my Revit space or on top of other windows. That's actually how I'm using this today with the PowerPoint presentation, right? As I click that and bring it forward, Hive stays in the foreground so I can keep it here and keep it active in front of you. It's one of the options that I really like to use myself. But our whole goal here is to talk about type selection. And so when I grab an object that has multiple types, let's kind of see what happens here. If I double click on the swing single Revit family, I know this has multiple types. And if I double click on this swing single here, it's going to scan the door and then give me access to whatever those types happen to be. In this case, there are 5 types that I can choose from. Now, this window itself has its own sort of options, and how you interact with this content is very much determined by these types of options right here. One of the options is the Revit version, and by default, Hive will choose the version closest to your active Revit version in this case, or AutoCAD version. And since I'm using Revit 2020 in this case, and the most recent version this has at my fingertips is the 2018 version, that's what it presents. In fact, it's the only version available to this door. Now, if I want to, with this dialog open, I can, of course, select some specific types and choose Load Selected Types. We've talked about this in a previous webinar where we're talking about consuming content. You can load selected types. You also have the option here of loading all types, okay? Another option, load all types. If you choose this, it doesn't matter how many types this has, it will load all of them for whatever version it is you've chosen. But this is where today's discussion comes into play. Some end users don't like this dialog box popping up, and there's an option related to that. Now, I personally don't recommend this option, but there is an option here. You can choose to not display this type selector dialog at all. Now, what does that mean? If this doesn't always display when loading a type, what will it do? Well, it will use the most recent version. It will not give you a choice. It will use whatever one's closest to your active Revit version, and it will load all types 100% of the time if I uncheck this box. So in this case, I can choose to load 2 types, load selected types, okay? And I can bring them into my project, and it's going to do the one-time upgrade, and it's going to do whatever, and it'll start the, initiate the placement of this into my model environment. And of course, it's going to ask me if I want to save my model, which I don't. But it's going to start that placement command, and that's great. But since I unchecked the box that said always prompt, well, now it's never going to prompt again. Now I need to find something else that has multiple types so I can show you that it's not going to prompt. And for that, I'm going to need to open up my details page so I can find another piece of content that has multiple types. Okay, this is a good example. Swing double. Swing double only has 3 types, but when I load this into my project, because I unchecked that box about prompt, it's not going to ask what version of the content, and it's not going to ask me which types of content it is that I want to load. It is going to load all 3, and it's just going to bring them in and then initiate the placement of that, right? So while that's nice sometimes, that also means as an end user, you're not really being very surgical or clean about the loading. If this door happened to have 500 types, all 500 types would have been loaded in, and it wouldn't have asked me because I told it not to display. Now, if you know ahead of time, like, okay, I usually typically have fewer than 5 to 10 types, and I typically always load all. Okay, great, that's fine. And if there comes a time when you see a family that has hundreds of types and you want to be able to be selective, you have to preemptively take an action. I want to show you where you can turn back on that prompt. And I'm also going to make a recommendation here about how you interact with this. If you go to your username here in the top right corner of Hive, and you go to user settings, there are some settings that you can control here. One of them is how many items display on the page when you find stuff. My default here as Joe is 25. I personally prefer in my account to use 50 when I'm logged in as Sean Zerbis. But You might want to choose to have 100. I probably wouldn't do that, but you could, right? So 50 is kind of the default that I personally like. Joe's got 25 on their account. It is what it is. But right here, this is the checkbox that I was just talking about. Display type selector dialog when loading a family. We unchecked that while loading a family, so it never displays. But if you want to turn it back on again, perfectly fine. Simply check the box right here, display type selector dialog when loading a Revit family. This is very Revit family specific. So if you're not in Revit, this doesn't really apply to you. But I'm going to save this right here. It's going to take it a second. It's going to take those settings, take effect. The next time that I want to load something that has multiple types, let's see, does this guy? In fact, probably most of these don't have multiple types. Single. Let's go find something that does have multiple types here, eh? Let's go to, let's go turn off details and go back to filters here and search for, nope, search for furniture. Furniture, and that's all I want right there. Furniture, actually let's do doors and furniture. We'll get kind of both things side by side. That'll be fine. Some of these objects here should really have multiple types. Let's turn our details back on again. Yeah, there's 2 in this case. Only 2, but there are 2 for this chair. That's kind of a big family. Let's pick something else. It's a little smaller. This one also has 2. We'll use this guy because it's a little bit smaller of a family. It'll take and load a little bit faster. As I double click on this one and bring this into my project, this is again going to come from 2018. But this time, because I've checked that box on, it will again give me the option to load one or the other. But if you choose to, and this is the way that I'd recommend that you work with this, okay? Let this box come up, and if you want all types, choose load all types. And if you don't want all types, then you have the choice. But if you double click this and it pops the box, just if you want all, load all. And it takes just a second. And that way it saves you just a little bit of time in making the choice to load that. I can place this, it's furniture, so it doesn't show up in my general floor plan view, but it can place that. If I go to my finished plan, yeah, there's that object, right? But that way it'll save me just a bit of time, and I won't have to worry about forgetting to re-enable that dialog in the future. So I personally, when I'm loading something, I don't ever just uncheck that box, and I don't recommend that you do either. I recommend that you let this pop up, choose load all if you want to load all, and if you don't, well, then you choose a specific type that you want and load just the one, especially like in this case. There's a bunch of them, and I probably know, which one or ones I want, and I can be quite a bit more surgical and specific, and then it just saves my model some size and keeps my model running fast and happy. It's just a little better, I think. Of course, it's an option, so you can do whatever it is you need. All right, what's the next kind of concept here? Let's take a look here, and that is the filter and detail panel options. Now, one thing you might notice here is that my details window is open. You can toggle that off and on, and I recommend that you toggle details open and closed throughout the day. As you need more detail about something, if you need more detail, you select that, open up the details about that object, and kind of start seeing some information about whatever this is, how it's tagged, what category it's a part of, what Revit version perhaps it's associated to, even right on down to the data within that particular type and whatever the parameters are that associate to that, right? You can start really digging in. Oh, that's a Herman Miller specific component. I already knew that from the name, but specifically what model number is this particular object related to from their catalogs, right? So I can see a lot more data here. And you can even filter within these parameters if you want to for specific properties. Find me within this family parameters that match value such and such, model number such and such. And then I can start going to the different types and kind of see which one actually has that property, know exactly which one it is that I want to insert. And interestingly here, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but you can right-click and load this specific version directly into your project as well if you find a type that you want. So this details panel can be a great way of displaying and loading very specific things very quickly, all right? But I do toggle the details panel off and on because I like to see as many content entries as I can, and then when I want to see details, I'll turn on the details. This is a persistent window right away. The other panel that I personally like to have on all the time, and you may as well, I would recommend it honestly, is the filters panel. Now, you can use the filters panel in two different ways, and it's your option how you use this. And when you're using it in these two different ways, it's saved specifically to your user. You control how this is persistent or not persistent. When you expand out filters, it can either, when you click on it, pop out, and then as you click back to your results window, it can go away. So you can open it up, see it, use it, and let it go away if you want to. The other option here is if you open this up and you pin it, you can actually pin this to persistently stay on screen. And this is how I personally use this. I'll actually take my window typically and make this just wide enough to show me 3 pieces of content here with my preferred preview image size. And then I have my filters out here all of the time. And I do that so that I always know when there are 3 filters applied, what are the 3 filters, and I can control them immediately. I could go in here to my categories filter and remove everything if I really wanted to. That's all kinds of nice, and I could reapply and have it rerun my search based on whatever. You know, I can see all of those and immediately have access to this, but it's up to you to control if this is persistent or if it's not persistent. So I personally recommend that it is, right? You can close it, reopen it. That's fine as well, but when it's open, I like it staying pinned on screen so I can use that consistently. That's just a way of displaying those options, right? And this also, again, depending on how wide you want your Hive window, may determine some of your preview image sizing, because I can make this a little bit, bigger of a preview, and I see fewer elements. This is, by the way, why I make it so that my previews are maximum width for the size of the tile that has to be there when I'm in this kind of view. That's great, right? And then I can collapse or expand my filters as needed, or make my window a little bigger, smaller, whatever the case may be. But this is kind of how I prefer to use this. This does mean that if I have filters and details open, that I'll probably make my window a bit wider. So again, I can have 3 tiles wide with my details. So when I select this, I see the data about whatever that happens to be very easily here in my details window. This is Sean's preferred setup. Well, it looks like it's Joe's preferred setup in this case, because that's how Joe's going to see it the next time they open up Hive and begin working with that. All right, I'm going to unpin Hive from the foreground, and it's time for us to step into sort of the questions and answers period of our little webinar today. If you aren't planning on sticking around for questions and answers, that's fine. I want to say to everybody who attends here live, thank you. I always appreciate when you attend live and we get a chance to interact a bit, and you can ask questions about these different kind of user-specific controls with this Hive CMS user series. So thank you for attending. That said, if you do have questions, go ahead and throw them into the questions window, and I'll hang out here for a few minutes, and we'll talk about some of those questions. Well, I'm not actually seeing any questions show up just yet. Give it just a couple more seconds. Yeah, looks like there's no questions rolling through, and that's okay. So once again, thank you all for attending. We do appreciate when you attend live, and we do look forward to seeing you in future CTC webinars, especially these that are the Hive user series. We hope that you find these valuable and that you can use this to better your usage of Hive the CMS at your firm. Thank you all, and have a great day.